You can grow old with serenity or with bitterness, and the choice, according to Native American elders, begins with a single habit. Margaret was 74 years old when she sat down at her kitchen table one morning and realized she couldn't remember the last time she had done something just for herself. For 50 years, she had been the one who showed up. She was the mother who stayed up late helping with school projects. She was the wife who quietly swallowed her own dreams so her husband's career could grow. She was the grandmother who drove 40 minutes every Tuesday to babysit, even on the days her knees made walking feel like climbing a mountain. She was the neighbor who brought casseroles to funerals and cakes to birthdays, the friend who always answered the phone, the woman who somehow always found something left to give, even when she felt completely empty inside. And then one by one life changed around her. Her husband passed. Her children moved away, not out of cruelty, but out of living their own lives the way she had always hoped they would. The grandchildren grew up and got busy with their own worlds. The phone stopped ringing quite so often. The Tuesdays became free in a way that felt less like rest and more like forgetting. That morning at the kitchen table, with her coffee going cold in her hands, Margaret looked around at the quiet house and asked a question that had been building inside her for years. I gave everything I had to everyone I loved. So why do I feel like I've somehow arrived at the end of my life with nothing left that belongs to me? It wasn't a question born from self-pity. It was something deeper, a genuine wondering, a hunger for meaning that no amount of being useful had ever fully satisfied. If you've ever felt something like what Margaret felt, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not lost. What you may be missing is something the elders have understood for generations, a truth about what this stage of life is actually for. Because in Native American tradition, the final years are not a slow fade. They are not a waiting room. They are not the part of the story that comes after the important parts are finished. According to the elders who have walked this path before us, the last years of life are the most sacred years of all, and they carry a purpose that most of the modern world has simply forgotten how to recognize. In this conversation, we're going to explore 5 teachings that come from that ancient understanding. We're going to talk about what it means to finally stop carrying what was never yours to carry. We're going to talk about the relationship between silence and peace, between letting go and becoming whole, between the life you lived and the soul you're still becoming. We're going to talk about legacy not as something you build, but as something you simply are. Before we continue, take a moment to check that you're already subscribed to this channel, and write in the comments what state or country you're watching from. I always love knowing how far these stories and teachings travel. There's a reason Native American elders were called elders, and not just old people. In many indigenous traditions across this land, age was not something to be managed or hidden or apologized for. It was something to be listened to. An elder wasn't simply someone who had lived a long time. An elder was someone who had paid attention to that long life, someone who had watched the same river through every season and understood something about water that younger eyes simply couldn't see yet. These elders didn't learn from books. They learned from sitting still long enough to notice what the world was trying to say. They watched how the oldest trees in the forest were the ones that bent most gracefully in the wind without breaking. They watched how a river doesn't fight the stones in its path. It flows around them, and in doing so, it shapes the entire landscape over time. They watched how the eagle doesn't chase the storm, but rises above it, using the very wind that tries to push it down to lift itself higher. And they watched human beings. They watched what happened to people who held on too tightly. They watched what happened to people who never forgave. They watched what joy looked like when it came not from achievement, but from presence. They watched what peace looked like in a person who had stopped pretending and started simply being. These teachings aren't meant to make you feel like you missed something. They're meant to make you feel like you still have time, because the elders believed that wisdom doesn't truly ripen until the later years, and that the people who need these lessons most are exactly the ones who have already lived enough to understand them. So let's begin. One of the first things the elders noticed about people who aged with bitterness was this: they were still carrying weight that should have been set down decades ago. It might be a relationship that ended badly and was never spoken about again. It might be a decision made in a moment of fear that shaped the next 30 years. It might be the quiet belief, never fully examined, that their needs mattered less than everyone else's, a belief they accepted so long ago they forgot it wasn't the truth. Think about the people you know who seem to grow heavier as they age rather than lighter. Not physically, but in spirit. There's a tiredness in their eyes that sleep doesn't fix, a guardedness in how they talk about their past. a flinch when certain names come up in conversation. That weight has a name in the elders' understanding. It's called unlived grief. It's the sadness that never got to be sadness because there was always something more urgent to attend to. It's the anger that got turned inward because expressing it felt too dangerous. It's the longing for a different life that got buried under the life that actually happened. The elder doesn't say this to make you feel worse. The elder says this because there is a practice that goes with it. The practice is simply this: let it be witnessed. You don't have to fix the past. You don't have to have the conversation you never had, or confront the person who hurt you, or rebuild what fell apart. But you do have to stop pretending the weight isn't there. You have to let yourself sit quietly with what actually happened in your life. Not the version you told others, not the version you told yourself to survive, but the full and honest and tender truth of it. The elders called this the practice of honest sitting. Just you and your life, with nothing left to prove and no one left to protect. When you let yourself really feel what you've been carrying, something surprising happens. It starts to get lighter. Not because you fixed it, but because you finally stopped pretending it wasn't there. Margaret tried this one afternoon in her backyard. She sat in the old chair by the garden, the one her husband used to sit in, and she just let herself remember things she hadn't let herself remember in years. She cried. Not the polite, contained tears she allowed herself at funerals, but the kind that come from somewhere much older and much deeper. And when it was over, she sat there in that chair feeling something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt lighter. Here is something the elders understood, that the modern world seems to have forgotten entirely. Getting older is not the same thing as being done. Somewhere along the way, our culture decided that a person's value lived mostly in their productivity, in what they produced, what they managed, what they built. And so naturally, when the building slows down, when the managing becomes less, when the producing gives way to something quieter, many people begin to feel, without quite being able to explain it, that they are somehow less needed, less interesting, less relevant. And this feeling, the elders would tell you, is one of the most dangerous lies that old age has to offer. Think about the people in your own life who felt this way. The man who retired after 40 years and within 6 months seemed to have lost his sense of who he was. The woman whose children left home and who suddenly found herself wondering what her mornings were actually for. These aren't failures of character. These are people who accepted, without questioning it, the idea that their worth was tied to their function. The elders' teaching is different. It says that in the last years of life, you are not winding down. You are transitioning into a different kind of purpose, one that has less to do with doing and much more to do with being. The elders believed that the older a person became, the more their simple presence carried a kind of medicine. Not medicine in the way of advice or instruction, though that too, but medicine in the way that a certain quality of calm, of depth, of unhurried attention can heal the people around you without a single word ever being spoken. Your grandchildren don't need you to be useful. They need you to be real, to sit with them without looking at your phone, to tell them a story about something that actually happened, to let them see what a person looks like when they've survived hard things and still found reasons to laugh. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, an enormous thing. Your story is not finished. It has simply entered its most important chapter. This teaching tends to be the one that people resist most. Because forgiveness sounds to many people who have been genuinely hurt like being asked to pretend the hurt wasn't real, or to hand someone who wronged them a kind of permission they never earned. And so many people carry wounds into their final years that they have held on to so carefully for so long that the wound and the person have become almost impossible to separate. There was a man named Harold, 79 years old, who hadn't spoken to his brother in 18 years. The falling out had been real and had involved real harm and real betrayal. Harold had every reason to be angry, and he was. He had organized his anger carefully, the way you organize a room you spend a lot of time in. He knew exactly where everything was. But Harold also had high blood pressure. He had trouble sleeping. He had a kind of low-grade exhaustion that his doctor couldn't fully explain. And he had a grandchild who asked him once with a child's simple and devastating directness, "Grandpa, why do you look sad even when you're smiling?" The elders' teaching on forgiveness does not say the other person deserved it. It does not say what happened was acceptable. It says only this: the person who is still carrying the weight of an old wound is the one who continues to be wounded by it every single day. Forgiveness, in this tradition, is not something you give to another person. It is something you give to yourself. It is the act of deciding that you are no longer willing to let someone who may not even think about you anymore, continue to have that kind of power over your peace. Harold didn't call his brother. He didn't send a letter. He sat in his kitchen one evening and spoke out loud to someone who wasn't there. He said what he had needed to say for 18 years. He let himself feel the grief underneath the anger, because there is always grief underneath anger, the elder will tell you. Always. And when he was done, he sat quietly for a long time. He didn't forgive his brother that night, but he forgave himself for letting the wound define so many years, and that, it turned out, was the place he actually needed to start. Before we move to the next teaching, I want to share something with you. Many of the reflections I've been preserving about aging, inner peace, silence, and the lessons that modern times have forgotten were gathered together in a book called The Last Teachings. It's a simple conversation, written the same way an elder would speak to someone sitting beside him. If you'd like to go deeper into these teachings, you'll find the link in the first comment below. There is a river that runs through the high mountain country of the American West that the elders used to bring young people to when they were struggling with something they couldn't let go of. Not to explain anything, just to watch. Because the river doesn't fight the stones in its path. It doesn't push against them in frustration. It doesn't go still and refuse to move because something is in the way. It finds the shape around the obstacle and keeps moving, and over time, not overnight, not in a rush, but over the patient, persistent passage of time, the stone itself is changed by the river's refusal to stop. The elders called this teaching about resistance, and they applied it specifically to the experience of aging, because aging, they had observed, was the thing that most people spent enormous energy resisting. The body changes. There's no point arguing with that. The things that once came easily now require more effort. The face in the mirror carries more of the journey than it once did. The energy that used to be endless now asks for rest. And for many people, each of these changes is met with a kind of internal argument, a pushing back, a refusal to accept what is simply true. This resistance, the elder would say, is not protecting you from anything. It is simply making the experience of change more painful than it needs to be. The river doesn't mourn the path it used to take before the stone was there. The river simply finds the new path and continues forward. This doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean surrendering your health or your dignity or your sense of self. It means something much more specific. It means that the energy you spend fighting what cannot be changed is energy that belongs to something else. To the grandchild who wants to hear a story, to the morning walk that your body still loves even if it's slower than it once was, to the conversation you've been meaning to have, to the book you've been meaning to read, to the moment of simply sitting in the sun and noticing that the sun is still warm and that warmth is still a gift. The river is wise not because it never faces obstacles. The river is wise because it never lets an obstacle become its entire story. And now we arrive at the teaching the elders saved for last. The one they believed could only be truly heard by someone who had already lived a full life. Because this teaching requires something that only time can give you. It requires the kind of knowing that comes not from being told something, but from having lived it yourself. Here is what the elders said about the final years of life. They said that every hard thing you survived was not an accident. Every loss you carried, every difficulty you walked through, every moment when you thought you couldn't continue, and then somehow did. All of it was preparation, not punishment, not bad luck, not the universe being careless with your life. Preparation. Preparation for what? For exactly this. For the person you are right now, sitting wherever you're sitting, having lived what you've lived, knowing what you know, carrying the particular combination of sorrow and joy and wisdom and tenderness that only you carry, in exactly the way that only you carry it. The elders believed that the soul doesn't reach its fullness until late in life, that the person who is 70 or 75 or 82 years old, who has loved and lost and rebuilt and endured, carries something in them that the world genuinely needs. Not in a vague, polite way, in a real and specific way. The young are full of energy and possibility, but the old are full of something the young cannot yet access, a quality of presence that comes from having already faced most of what there is to fear and discovered that you survived it. There is a word for this in some traditions. Roughly translated, it means the one who has already crossed the difficult water, and what it implies is that those who have crossed the difficult water can stand on the shore and simply be there for the ones who are still in the middle of crossing, not to fix it, not to rush them, not to explain from a distance that it will be okay, just to be there, visible, on the shore, already dry, already safe, living proof that crossing is possible. You are that person now. You may not have thought of yourself that way. Margaret didn't. Harold didn't. But both of them by the end came to understand something that changed the quality of their remaining years completely. They understood that the life they had lived, with all its complications and imperfections and wrong turns and quiet triumphs, was not something that had happened to them. It was something they had become, and that who they had become was exactly what was needed. Not by the world in general in some grand sense, but by the specific people around them, in the specific moments that still lay ahead. This is what the final years are for, not for fading, not for waiting, for arriving, finally, fully, into the person all of that living was making you. If these words have touched something in you, you might want to know more about the last teachings. In it, I've gathered some of the most important lessons about solitude, relationships, inner peace, and what truly matters as the years pass. And you'll also receive a special teaching called The Secrets of the First Hour, about the quiet habits that many elders considered sacred for beginning each day. The link is in the first comment. Before we reach the end of this conversation, let's pause together for a moment. The first teaching reminded us that we are allowed to set down what we've been carrying, that honest sitting, the act of finally letting what happened be real, is the beginning of becoming lighter. The second teaching reminded us that getting older is not getting done, that the story is still going and that presence itself is a form of purpose more powerful than we were taught to recognize. The third teaching showed us that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, that releasing old wounds is not about the person who caused them, but about reclaiming the energy that belongs to the rest of our life. The fourth teaching offered us the wisdom of the river, that moving with change rather than against it is not weakness but intelligence, and that the obstacles in our path do not have to become the whole of our story. And the fifth teaching brought us to the deepest truth of all, that every difficulty survived was preparation, and that who you are right now, having lived what you've lived, is exactly who was needed. These are not 5 separate ideas. They are 5 parts of the same understanding. They are what the elders meant when they said that the last years are not the end of the journey, but the arrival. There is a tree that grows in certain parts of this country that the people of this land have always treated with particular reverence. It grows slowly. In its first decades, it is not much to look at, thin, uncertain, bending easily in the wind, but it keeps growing. Through drought years when the earth cracks and the smaller plants give up, through storms that take down younger trees around it, through seasons of ice and seasons of fire, and the long patient middle years when nothing dramatic happens, and it simply grows. And then, after a very long time, something changes. The tree becomes something that you feel before you see it. There is a quality of stillness around it, a shadow that somehow seems more significant than ordinary shadow. Birds choose it above other trees. People who walk beneath it slow down without knowing why. Children who play near it seem calmer. The tree hasn't done anything. It isn't trying. It is simply so fully itself after all those years of surviving and growing and bending and enduring that its presence alone has become a kind of shelter. The roots go down so deep now that no storm reaches them. The trunk has absorbed so many seasons that it no longer fears the weather. The branches have learned, through long experience, exactly how to hold the wind without breaking, not by being rigid, but by being deeply, unmovably rooted. This is what the elders saw in the oldest among their people. Not decline, not the sad diminishment of what something once was, the full arrival of what it was always meant to become. So here, at the end of this conversation, is the question the elders always left with the people they spoke to, not to make them feel they had done something wrong, not to generate regret, but to open a door. If the years you have left were the years you were actually made for, if everything that came before was the preparation and not the point, what would you do differently, starting tomorrow morning, with the quiet and extraordinary life that is still, right now, entirely yours?